Okay, good morning. Good morning. We are on page 140 in Hemshech Tzadik Dalet, which corresponds to pages 1157, 1158 in Ayin Beis. Yeah. And this is all middle of the discussion of the second oifen, the second type of bittul, the second level of bittul, which is the actual bittul of the Mitzvah Sa'ir itself, not just in contrast that it's nullified in the presence of a greater and higher level, but it itself senses that it does not have any existence of its own. It's completely dependent on its source, and were it not for the source, it wouldn't exist. Then on the top of page 139, Friedrich Rebbe said, the Yuvan Zeh b'muchash will understand this in a tangible, a more palpable way, because till here he was not speaking Aveda. He was just stating that level of bittul in the earth. Now he's speaking about it how it is in Aveda, meaning in our service, in our work. And that's what we're middle of right now, a long discussion of contemplation, his bonanus, of how a nivra, a creation, a creature, meaning ourselves, though we begin as a yesh, which is not like oir, we don't have bittul on our own, that we come to recognize that our existence is completely dependent on ratzon habeira, the desire, the will of God, the will of the Creator. And that's what we're middle of. I'll just do a little more of since it's Sunday, sometimes I do more of an overall summary. So briefly, I'm not going to go through the whole Ayin Beis as I sometimes do. We'll do that another time. The general theme of Ayin Beis is interface. And in volume 1, the major part of the discussion, which actually coming back here is tying it all together, was that an interface, Keser, is the primary interface. Keser is Ratzon. So we've been talking a lot about Ratzon. Ratzon makes the first connection between the one who desires and what he desires. So if there's no Ratzon, there's no interface. But in truth, higher than Ratzon is Oyer. Doesn't talk about that so much in Ayin Beis and Samach Vav. That's an important topic. But Oyer, because Oyer is not even in the shape of a Ratzon. You can't even say he wants something. Oyer, all it is dedicated to reflecting the divine. So in volume 1, he spoke much about these two levels. In Oyer itself, there's the Oyer, the Ratzon, the Makif, Keser, and there's the Oyer as it relates to existence, the Pnimis, which is the 10 spheres. Spoke the different levels in it. And then went to Oyer HaGvul and Oyer HaBli. All this is all connected to what we're learning now, because again, the Oyer HaBli is we learned there in volume 2, in volume 1, Shvuos, Ayin Gimel, and on, that air brings bittul into existence because it's a bligvul. Bligvul is beyond us, and therefore, when we relate to it, we sense it, we become nullified in its presence, become sublimated. Eir HaGvul's main function also brings bittul, but it's a bittul that brings through being tailored and commensurate and relating to existence, which is sometimes called Eir Mesevev and Eir Mamala. In the long discussions in volume 1 about the interface of Keser and in Keser itself, Chachmas Tima, where there's two levels of Chachmas Tima, the one that relates to what is revealed and one that's completely removed. If you go through all these ideas that each one of us has as our own memories of what we learned, they all tie together ultimately in this major interface, and that breaks down into every particular level. Where we are now is really coming after a long discussion, if you remember, between the difference in Shabbos and weekday, between Man, Lechem min Hashamayim, Lechem min Haaretz, which to sum up is Das Elyon and Das Tachten, the perspective from above, which we now know is the higher level of Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti, the Ayin Hamiti, which is the Oir, as it's a reflection of the divine, and the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra, Das Tachten, is the Ayin that relates to existence. And they're both levels in Ayin. They're both bittul, but one is a bittul that relates to existence, and one is a bittul that's beyond existence. That was all part, that whole discussion of man, what came to explain. If you remember Hayim, v'yedaita Hayim v'shavesa levavecha, the word Hayim, that Hayim means Yem and Laila, darkness and revelation, Eir and Gilui, Tzimtzum and Gilui. Those are the two parts of reality, and both of them interact with each other, and both are there to help each other. Tzimtzum is b'shvil hagilui. The tzimtzum is in order to reveal, and the revelation that's before the tzimtzum is ultimately made in order to become part of existence as well. And you may recall, this was all coming to answer a question, the big question: how can a post-tzimtzum reality, which whose entire existence is predicated on the concealment, because without the concealment, there'd be no room for existence. How could it experience pre-tzimtzum consciousness? And the answer was ultimately that we transformed the tzimtzum, because the whole tzimtzum was made in order to be able to have that consciousness, revelation. But it has to be step by step. So we can't jump to Das Elyon. We can't jump to the perception lifnei tzimtzum where elikus is b'pshitus, and the only reality is divine consciousness. So we go through the steps. First, we climb from the bottom up. So now, if you think about it, this piece now that we're in the middle of learning, that to understanding by Nevroim, this bittul is very much part of this whole process. Is teaching the Nevroim the bittul of what? The bittul, the second level, or the second type of bittul of Ur, because that's what Ur does. Ur is reveals and bittul. It reveals the divine, which in a sense is connected to the fact that it makes us bottle to the divine. Because the more you reveal the source, obviously the more sublimated and the more nullified we become, the more we recognize how that is the only true reality, which is ultimately the purpose of it all, that the Yesh comes to recognize that, and through that creates a Dira B'Tachtein. So somewhat of a shorter summary. One point I would also add, that remember all the V'yedaita Hayim, which we're going to get back to, by the way. In Ayin Beis, you'll soon see, after he finishes the levels of Bittul and Ur, he's going to come back to V'yedaita Hayim. He's going to come back first to Lechem in Hashemayim, Lechem in Haaretz, the two types of sustenance, two types of so-called bread, or if you wish, or nourishment. And then he's going to go back to V'yedaita Hayim, and that continues to be the theme through Ayin Beis, even in volume 3. And now V'yedaita Hayim came, if you remember, that came to explain even deeper that which was discussing about the transformation of the tzimtzum, which is all part of a long parenthesis. Let's not forget, we're in the middle of a long parenthesis of over 500 pages that began close to 1/3 into the volume 2 of Ayin Beis. Torah and Tefillah, which part of the interface? Torah draws down. Torah is more like a Das Elyon, and Tefillah is more like a Das Tachten, from the bottom up, because we pray comes through our initiative. And the two interpretations: are you drawing down Arimimcha into Alekai Hamelech? Arimimcha's Reimim was Keser Rotzen, the higher level, or here like the language Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Are you drawing that down into Alekai Melech, which is Alakus, that's Melech and Koyach, that manifests into existence? Or are you elevating and exalting Alekai Melech from the bottom up, elevating the lower level of Ayin of Elikus, that relates to existence? Are you elevating that to the divine, to the higher level of Ayin that's beyond existence? And that all ties together very beautifully. But we're in the middle of it all, so I'm going to bring it back now to this informing the smaller picture where we are now by the bigger picture. So in essence, this is a very vital piece, because he's explaining how Nivroim actually apply this bittul in our existence. Okay, so what do we learn from page 139 through 140, where we are now? So we learned about that this bittul that we're talking about, Nivroim, is the hergish is the feeling, I'm reading from the top of page 139. I'm not going to read the whole text. I'm just reading a few key lines. Is the hergish, the sense and the feeling that the entire kol inyan kiyum hametzias v'chayis hanivroim. I'm reading because this is like the headline. That the whole inyan, the entirety of the sustenance of existence and chayis hanivroim and the vitality of creation of the creatures is only due to the Tzenius Baruch. It only exists because God wants it to be, and that's why it has that permanence and perpetuation and sustenance and chayis. And then he began, Bereshis bara lakim, es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. Everything breaks, all of creation breaks into two categories, shamayim and aretz. Savah shamayim, savah aretz. The two armies, so to speak. They basically, God's armies. The tzvah shamayim are the celestial bodies, the tzvah aretz are the creatures on earth. The first one, perpetuates in its species, kayomim be'ish. Each individual celestial body lasts throughout existence the same thing, the same entity. And tzavah ha'aretz perpetuates in its species. The species remains. And then he said, these two, when you contemplate on it, he said there's two levels, two efanim, two ways of contemplation. And when we say more rabu masech havaya and more gadlu masech havaya, rabu and gadlu.
Godlu.
Okay. More rabu masech and more gadlu masech. Rabu is volume, sheer volume, and gadlu is size, greatness. So he said like this, that the Rabu Masech Havaya is talking primarily about Tzvah Ha'aretz, and detailed in specific details the sheer volume and multitude. First of all the different species, Daimon Sameach Chaim Medaber. Each one of them, even one species itself, has a multitude of, like he said, avonim pshutim, simple stones, so many different types. And even in the same type, also has, like he said with the tree in Sameach, that the leaves of the same tree of an apple tree and the leaves of a nut tree, the leaves of the same tree, even though the tree itself is one category, is also every creature is different, just like it is with human beings, that our faces are different. So all this teaches us, as he said, that the words he used was, what does this all show us? These are the words he used. That this riboy, each of them has tailored to it a particular life force according to its body, according to its personality. And that energizes it to live up to and fulfill the te'elas hanirsa, the desired purpose and benefit that each iota, each fiber of creation serves. And that's Rabbu Masech Havaya, Shem Ribu Min Avrem Adin Kedu Shiv Kulam Mushgachim Bashgacha Pratis. And they're all governed by divine, in specific detail, Bashgacha Pratis. So the Riboy teaches us this multitude, the volume, teaches us how each aspect is controlled and energized by the Creator, and is governed by the Creator. Okay, that is said with Svaharetz. Yeah.
How do you see
again? We're going to go into more detail. Hold on. He says all this is Svaharetz. Then he goes back and says that even though in the Svaharetz there's also Godlu, there's also greatness, there's also large creatures, but the primary feature when you contemplate on Svaharetz is its volume. There are large creatures. We mentioned elephant, a whale. But its primary thing is quantity. In Tzvah Shamayim, he said, there you have both. Tzvah Shamayim, you also have a multitude, but there's far more apparent because the sheer size of all the celestial bodies is awesome. So there, it's more, Godlu is the main focus there. He said this before, and he's going to say it again. I just want to find the exact language where he said it. He says, I knew the B'tzvar Shemayim Ariyesh Bezinyan, Ribui V'Gadlus. So B'tzvar is Hagam Shagam Be'edin V'Ram G'deon, Ikram Hu Ribui. Okay. Now, the next chapter, which is, I'm now summing up on the bottom of page 139, Omnam Kol Zeh, is Tzva Ha'aretz. But he's going to go back and forth now between the two. Again, he says, even though there are Nivraim G'delim, the primary thing is the volume, the number. So now the word godlu is used, godlus. And this end of the verse, how deep are your thoughts? So you have now emek, depth. So he's now going to explain why is it that in Tzva HaShamayim you have this, the focuses on what Godlu and Omku Machshavesach. So to explain that, he goes back to Tzva Haaretz. He's going back to learn more about the contemplation of the earthly creatures of earth. So what do we learn? And then we're going to go back to the celestial bodies. The mitzvah is ksiv. So he says, from what do we learn? It goes down deep. Before he just said that we learn hashgacha pratis and that God energizes each thing. Here he actually spells out. So what exactly do we learn from the creatures on earth? It's their volume. So he says we learn that everything is made b'chachma, kulam b'chachma sisa. It's all done with a wisdom. Wisdom. There's a wisdom to it. When you see the variety, as we said, even in one species itself, and even in one tree, or in one family of or one stone, or any of the species, anything, it indicates on the chachma that it was created with, the design. And he adds that chachma has a bina in it. The Zohar says, kulam chachma says a bebina. And he explained, because the beginning of creation, it all starts with chachma, the bereshis bara. I'm reading now from the top of 140. Everything starts, bereshis bechuchma, says the Targum Yenis. Chachma, everything starts with the nekudas chachma. Like bereshis nami maimerhu. That when God said bereshis bara lekimus hashmayim v'sa'aretz, there was a so type of kernel of wisdom. Think of it like a concentrated, all of creation and all its design is concentrated in chachma. And bina, he doesn't spell it out, but it's clear that bina would flesh that out. Maimer kloli. And what is that? What does it all indicate? It indicates on the wisdom, and he adds bina of it. And he says, the closer idea, what do we know? Mola ha'aretz kinyanecha. That earth is filled with your acquisitions, with your commodity, with your possessions. Basically, it's God's kinyan. So, in other words, the contemplation, even though existence is a yesh, but when you contemplate, in this case, we're talking marabu masecha. We're contemplating on the volume and the distinction. And you think about it, like he says before or later, ad ein ketz. I think earlier here, somewhere he said, look at the sheer volume. How many different creatures are there? And in the creatures themselves, the details, it all teaches you such an infinite type of design that's unbelievable. Shakolu elakus. Kinyonecha means it's your kinyon. It's God's owns it. Meaning God created it and he controls it and he governs it. So it teaches us that everything is elakus. Okay. Shakol inyan haribin elevadze shemer ala beira baruchu. This whole ribui, this whole volume, this multitude, besides the fact that it indicates that there's a creator that created this multitude, hu machriach hu mavayir in the hashgacha pratis. It compels us and explains hashgacha pratis. Because all of this needs to be governed. Now, just for the record, this does not necessarily mean we know that, for example, even when a leaf turns over, it's hashgacha pratis. But that doesn't mean that God did not embed in nature a certain ability to cope and to adjust. everything still needs hashgacha pratis. But I'm just saying, when people say, what about the concept of creatures evolving or adjusting or adapting to circumstances? Fine, that's all part of the divine plan. So whether the Eibishter is actually right now, he's renewing all of creation, but he also created creation with adjustable and adaptable features. Okay.
But this is ein Adam Neukef, it's boy milmato, elam kein machrizin olam milmailo. Even though that he made it the nature, Hashgacha Pratis means that he is doing it right now.
Yeah, fine. Yep. Like we say, when you plant a seed in the ground, obviously the ground is a certain natural ability, but it's hamayim b'chelam because God is giving that energy. What about tzvar shamayim now? So we've established how tzvar aretz, how the creatures of earth teach us about God through their volume, through their kamus, through their ribui, marabu masecha. What about tzvar shamayim here? Magodla masecha. So he says, Gudele hanivraim. This is their size, their immense size. By the way, I said before, large creatures, elephant, whale, there's also a pasuk that says, Akerech hanera. Glaciers are yet another. Those are tzva haaretz. They are on earth, in the waters. Glaciers is Akerech hanera. It's called the awesome ice. And people who see it, it is quite awesome if you ever saw it in Alaska or in other places. So I wanted to just clarify, large creature doesn't only mean in min ha'chai or min ha'tzameach or min ha'tzameach also, the red trees, in Northern California, the other very large trees there that are also quite immense. However, the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying, because I kept saying elephant and whale, and we now realize also tzameach and doimim have also awesomely large creatures. But the main focus is the volume. Tzva shamayim is gdeli hanevraim. So what does that teach us? From that we know that how very deep are your thoughts. So it teaches you on amkus. Now what does amkus mean? What is the amkus? I mean, obviously in the design of the creatures of earth, there's also depth. We're going to learn now what amkus is. So to explain it, he begins with the pasuk, Hashemayim mesaprim kveit kel. The heavens relate. They tell us the glory or the honor of God. Says the Medrash. What does that mean? Medrash Tanchuma gives an example of a gibur. Again, I'm reviewing what we've learned, and then we'll continue. A gibur that arrived to a new country, to Shenichlas L'Medina. He entered a country where they don't recognize, they don't recognize or know the extent of his gvura, even if they know something, but they don't know the extent. So how do you find out how strong this man is? So there was a pikach echad, a wise man, sharp, shrewd individual, and said, you know it from the stone that he will lift or the stone that he will move. When you see,
not only move, that he is using to fight. Misgoishes means that he is fighting with somebody.
Like a shield or something. Fine. So when you see what kind of stone he can lift and use, that tells you. That means when you look at him directly, you may not see it, but when you see the stone that he's able to control. Yedim es gurosi. Kach, says the Medrash, Hashemayim mesaprim kveit kel. The same thing is with Shamayim, that heaven, when you look at the heavens, it's like this stone. It's an awesome sight. Shema nevroim hagdelim mesaprim. They're nevroim dem, they're awesome size. And we're talking about things like, the sun, the moon. I mean, there are stars out there. They're just a very solar system. The size of it is so enormous that say that Tzel and Kveit Kel, he says in Yiddish, they tell us that Tzel is like telling a story. They indicate, they showed us. In other words, we know that God is all powerful. But how do we see it as human beings on earth in contemplation? So to see that type of awesome power, That you don't see in the volume. In the volume, you see, as he said, you see the design, you see the Ashgacha Pratis Elikus. Here, you see the sheer strength and power. So that's what's now. You could say, does God really need us to know how powerful he is? But in our terms, that's what the moshel of the Medrash is. It means on our terms, how do we recognize it? Obviously, God is all powerful, and you could imagine that without seeing heaven. But by seeing the awesomeness, just as I just want to mention, Richard Feynman, the Jewish physicist, the brilliant physicist, died, is already in heaven, wherever he is. So he wrote that he was a believer in God until he came to realize how large, how expansive and vast the universe was, that made him conclude that there is no God. Why? Because so much waste of space. So if you build a house with a large living room, okay, a large living room because you have a large family or you want to have a lot of guests. But he says if something is so large that 99.9% of it will never be used and never be accessed by the human race, which God said is the center of the universe, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, so much wasted space. So I remember when I read it, it was too late already because he was already not well. I wrote him a letter and I used this mimer. I explained it. I said, sometimes God creates something, not because we're going to use it. It's not utilitarian. We're going to use it like a kitchen or a living room or a bedroom. It's to actually remind us of something that is so awesome, so it teaches us about God's awesomeness. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. I remember
He was a Yid?
Tovshim Gimel.
He was a Jew?
I can't remember the exact dates. There was twice that the Rebbe spoke about the redwood trees in California. And he said that they're trees that some say go back to the beginning of creation almost, thousands of years. And they're very, very large, very tall and large. The Rebbe said these words in one of those Fabrengens. He said, why do you find them only there? You know, why don't you find any such trees in Chetzi Kadra Elyon in the hemisphere where Israel is? The Rebbe answered. The Rebbe said, the Frierdiker Rebbe once wrote, the Alter Rebbe said this, but the Frierdiker Rebbe once wrote in a letter. The letter actually was to the Rebbe. He explains when the Alter Rebbe says that Chetzi Kadra Tacht Matan Torah did not happen in Chetzi Kadra Tacht. Matan Torah happened in Har Sinai, which is the Chetzi Kadra Elyon. Elyon Tachten here, Elyon would be the hemisphere essentially of Israel, Europe, Africa, Asia. The lower half, and here we're talking about, there's obviously 4 different hemispheres, but we're talking about the globe that way. The lower is America is considered Chetzi Kadra Tachten, Australia, South Africa. So the Rebbe said, so the Rebbe asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, what does that mean that Matan Torah didn't happen? Matan Torah happened the whole world. The Jews were not in Chetzi Kadra Tacht. They were there, but it affected the whole world. So the Frierdiker Rebbe answers in the letter. If you want, the letters are printed in Tafshin Ches and Sefer Ma'am Tafshin Ches. And the Frierdiker Rebbe answers that Begoli. The Alter Rebbe means Begoli. In other words, there was some impact that had in a more revealed way in the Chetzi Kadra Elyon. Chetzi Kadra Tachten is a darker place. That's why the Rebbe made such a fuss when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America in 1940. We're talking now 81 years, 80 some years ago, a little more than 80 years ago. What the Rebbe didn't say was just another thing. He says it was a whole new stage in history. And now Chassidus, Torah Chassidus, was brought to Chetzi Kadra Tachten, meaning bring it even to the further outskirts. So the Rebbe answered in that Sikha, since Matan Torah was in the Chetzi Kadra Elyon, the Eibishter wanted to give Chetzi Kadra Tachten something to remind us of God's godless greatness. So that's why the trees, the redwood trees, are Dafkin Chetzi Kadra Tachten. That's what the Rebbe said, to remind us that even here we should remember the godless Habeirah. Okay, here he's saying on the Shamayim Misaprim Kveit Kel, that the Shamayim and their greatness, their immense size, is all indicating that Seil and Kveit Kel, they relate the glory, the honor of godliness. Okay. This is, I believe, where we stopped. It's not over yet, so we're middle of the subject. Let's continue now. And we still have to understand the omkumash machshavesecha that this tells us. But he's explaining. Now remember, all this arichus, which will go a few more pages, is a contemplation, the two contemplations for us to come to sense the bittul, the second type of bittul, that we sense that everything is dependent on Ratzon HaBeira. In other words, everything is revealing godliness, which is a taste, similar to how in the second level senses that it doesn't exist except because of its source. And if we're the most source, it wouldn't exist. Now, obviously, we're a yesh, and we're going to make the qualification at the end of the Maimer like he did in Ayin Beis. But meanwhile, this is coming to teach us a level of bittul, which comes with contemplation only. We don't come to this naturally, because naturally the yesh doesn't seek out and does not look for and does not relate to something except itself. So he's going to continue now. So we'll continue on 140. He says, Omnam. Now that we've explained that the heavens relate and tell us the story, they tell us the greatness of godliness. He's going to say, Omnam, Eifan Asipur. Nevertheless, the manner of this narrative, the Svar Shemoyim, the narrative that the celestial bodies tell us, they're not similar. It's not similar to the narrative that the creatures on earth tell us, that we said earlier. Now, interesting, it doesn't say, it says Hashemayim Mesaprim. And yet the Frierdiker Rebbe is using the word Sipur now, also on Tzvaros, because they also tell us a story. But the story is a different one, which is why he actually says Hashemayim Mesaprim. He's going to explain what's the difference. V'hainu, this means that Tzvar is V'Svar Hashemayim Shnei Mesaprim Kveit Kel. The earthly creatures and Tzvar Hashemayim and celestial bodies, the heavenly bodies, both of them tell us and relate to us and reveal for us Kveit Kel, the honor, the glory of God. Elo, yet Shem Chalukim be'efen ve'inyan sepurim. Nevertheless, they're different in the manner and in the content and in the scope, you can say, of their narrative, of Sipurim, of the story they tell. The Tzva Aretz is going to now explain the difference. The Tzva Aretz, which means, again, Tzva means army, but army means armies made up of soldiers, of military. So Tzva Aretz is an expression used for all the creatures on earth. Mesaprim u'megalim, they relate, or even narrate, you can say, u'megalim, and reveal the Mala Ha'aretz kinyanecha, that Mala Ha'aretz, the earth is filled kinyanecha with your possessions. It's your kinyan. It's God's creation. Like we said at the top of the page, line 3. He used that expression, Mala Ha'aretz. Ha'aretz is the expression, kinyanecha. Ta'kolu elakus. Like he said again, everything is divine. Everything is a product of the divine. Every detail, every species, every leaf, etc., everything we spoke about earlier. Okay. That's the story that Tzva Aretz tells us. And now he's going to explain further. He doesn't stop. V'hainu, this means the levad ze shabriya me'elal abayri yochid yizbarach. I mean, it's not repetitive, but he repeats some of the same ideas. Besides the fact that the Bria Meira indicates, the creation indicates on a creator. Now he says, Yochid Yisbarach, on the singular, the single only creator, may he be blessed. So besides that, he's going to remember, besides that, he said the same Levadzes on the top of the page. The creation, machriach. Strong word, machriach means it compels us. It and explains for us inyan hashgacha pratis. It's the third time he's saying this now. The idea of divine providence, specific divine providence. And now he explains, B'chol hamine bruyim v'yitzurim hayesek tanim v'chalushim. In every species, in every min, in every type of the bruyim are creations, yitzurim are the things that are shaped. Hayesek tanim. the smallest ones, the most minute, the chalushim, and weak. In other words, down to every fiber and every cell, and things that we would think are so small. So it's not just hashgacha pratis over the big things. Every fiber, every detail, every iota, ketanim v'chalushim, means small and weak. All this hashgacha pratis, the divine providence that's governing every detail of every part of the creation. This is all the hashgacha pratis of Rabu Masecha.
COVID-19.
The story that the earthly creatures teach us. Asher bahem val yodam, that through them, behem, in them, val yodam, and through them, yaskil v'yovin ha'adam, the person can, a human being, meaning us, can conceive and understand asher hashgacha yena, that the higher divine providence, the hashgacha, the governance above, he atzma hachayis aleki hamachayis kol nevraim. So it's not just hashgacha, it itself, that governance from above, that itself is the divine energy that energizes and vitalizes kol hanevraim, all the creatures. So this is obviously further developing this contemplation. This is bonus. The ha'adam roya ba'atzmei u'b'chol nevraim shel abriya kula elikus v'muchesh mamish. Basically saying that when the contemplation is, I'm adding when the contemplation is proper, and to this extent where you're really focusing on it, the person comes to see in himself. Because remember, we're also part of this creation. We also have details. The human body itself is a wondrous multitude of organisms and details and so on, all working. So both Ba'atzmei, B'chol and Nevraim, and in all the creatures of Shal Abriya Kula for entire creation, what does he see? Elikus b'muchesh mamish. He mamish sees elikus b'muchesh. You can actually see the divine within all of it in a very palpable, tangible way. Now, I know, well, I don't know if you're going to jump, but right away, 1 second, just say, who sees this? Even though we understand all this, yes, with our minds, you can understand, like if you saw an unbelievable machine, a computer, an iPhone, they spaceships that took human beings to the moon, or whatever, you could say, wow, to be able to do that, someone has to be governing it. It's like seeing it b'muchesh. Okay, but he's saying here that when you contemplate the same type of muchesh, because obviously you don't see the scientists or the technicians or the engineers physically, but you see from the design, it's as clear as day that whoever did this was brilliant. This is even in a human-made machine. So what he's saying here is that when you contemplate then on the universe, on Earth here, he's talking about the earthly creatures and all the details and so on, and all the elements of it, that whole volume, and especially, he doesn't say it explicitly here, he's going to say a little later how they all coordinate with each other. Doesn't mention that yet. So that tells you, but you'll say 1 second, are we like Oyer? Is our bittul like Oyer? Obviously not, because this did begin with seichel. This began with a contemplation. But he does use the word reya, as I said, reya ha'adam, ba'arei ba'atzmei, elakuz b'muchesh mamish. So obviously you need to qualify it. It's not quite how neshama is the atzilus, how the Alter Rebbe, when he said he looked at a beam, he could see the dvar Hashem keich hapel benifel. But relatively speaking, you can come to a point where you recognize, like the machine tells you there's a genius that built this computer, that there's a genius behind the creation of the details of every part of existence. That's the basic way to explain this. Now, obviously, with the more Aveda you do, the more you come to this type of awareness. Now, still, we haven't gotten yet to the second sipur, the story and the narrative that the Tzva Shamayim tell us. So he's going to say it like this: V'hine, and now, Yediyah zu, this awareness or this perception, hagam she yediyah gdela, the rechava be'elakus, though it's a great awareness and perception, and rechava means expansive, a great and expansive perception in the divine, in godliness, b'chol zeh, nevertheless, hirak yediyah muchshis b'mefsei hamishush. It's only, it's interesting, the Frierdiker Rebbe dismisses this like an only. I would find this to be quite a high level, but he says, Hirak, Yediyah Mukhshis, it's only a tangible and palpable awareness, b'mefsei hamishush, with the proofs that you can touch, that you can relate to with your senses. Remember, because this is, what do we know? We see a universe with such details, like he said. Every detail, down to the smallest detail, that is governed and energized by the divine. So it's a riyah mukhshiz, but it's a riyah mukhshiz that's very much connected to the empirical, the things that we can relate to. What he means by mamash here, mamash means you can touch, but mamash literally generally means a tangible sense. Like when you see something with your eyes, you could also call it somewhat mamash. So but here he's mean mamash. I mean, you could also say it's touching it, but it doesn't necessarily mean physically you have to touch every part of the creation. But he means it's very tangible, it's very palpable. There's a lot of words here, interesting words. Repeat it again. He's going to give a very powerful example to explain this. That is not commensurate at all. It's not at all. It doesn't come close to a deep perception. In other words, mamoshis means you understand it and you know it, but it's something that you can relate to more because it's more obvious. Yediyah, a yunis means something behind the scenes. You get to learn something much deeper. Like, let's go back for a moment to the example I gave. You see a machine, you see a computer, you see an automobile, you see an airplane, you see a painting even. So it tells you whoever built this or created it or crafted it or painted it is a brilliant engineer. But it doesn't tell you about the iyun. You don't know the depth. The omku machshav v'secha, which we're soon going to learn. You don't know the depth. Like we talked many times, the analogy I keep giving about the artist. You know there's an artist. You know it's a lakus. You know that. You could even say the artist is a very talented artist. But you don't know the depth. You don't know the level of how deep this person is and what are the deeper levels of his being, even in a human level. So essentially, by looking and contemplating Amar Rabu Masecha, he's saying you get to know everything is alakus, everything is governed, but you don't have a yediyah yunis, meaning a deep understanding of the creator or the engineer, the cosmic engineer behind this. Whereas Shamayim, Tzva Shamayim is going to give us a deeper understanding. So that's the Amku. So he's now going to explain what's the difference between a Yediyah Yunis and a Yediyah Mukhshis, the Mefsei Hamishush. He's going to explain the difference between the two, and then we're going to go back to Tzva Shamayim. If you want to ask some, you could ask some, but I would reserve all questions till after he explains this difference. He's going to give a difference between two types of chokhmah. Ukamoi, chokhmas hamaisa legabe chokhmas hanefesh. Oh, that's a good. Chokhmas hamaisa, that's essentially the wisdom around something that's a craft. Chokhmas hamaisa would be carpentry, pottery, anything that is connected to building something. So there's a lot of wisdom there. And Chokhmas HaNefesh essentially really is psychology. Chokhmas HaNefesh is understanding the inner workings of the human psyche and soul, called Chokhmas HaNefesh. So he's basically distinguishing now between a Chokhmah around something that is related to action and something that never comes to action. It's more about what shapes or defines a human being and the Nefesh HaAdam. Okay. The Basiyu B'Poel, Yeshnem Gamkin Chochmes Amukis, V'Sichlim Gdelim. In a Basiya, in an action, U'B'Poel, and an implementation. In other words, bring it into an action. Even, for example, people who are brilliant at execution. You give them an idea, and they can build a whole industry around it. I remember reading once, just an example. Someone asked me a question, who has, I mean, now things may be a little different, but who has the largest fleet of airplanes on Earth? Which airline? So, people start thinking Delta, United, American, no. FedEx or UPS, they have the largest number of planes. And then the second half of the question is, what is the most impressive feat in business today? So everybody would answer computers, internet, iPhones, Apple, Amazon. And the consensus is no, because once you build machines and the algorithms, which is brilliance, they are automated. You have to make sure that, fix any glitches or bugs or so on. They said the thing is, when FedEx and these guys that deliver packages, they have to deliver literally millions and millions of packages, and all should be on time, and you're dealing with human beings. So you have to have such a structure of having hundreds of thousands of stuff from the pickup until it's delivered, and it should all work efficiently. That's considered one of the greatest feats today. I'm just mentioning it. Why? Because that's a chachma, that's someone who created a tremendous system, and it works most of the time, almost, it's not 100%, but it's pretty good. It just came to mind. So what he's saying now in Maisa, chachmas ha-Maisa could be, as I said, pottery, it could be architecture, it could be carpentry, it could be plumbing for that matter. So he says there, and bepoil, and it struck me because he said not Maisa bepoil, he said Maisa ubepoil, the Basiya ubepoil, in action and ubepoil, in implementation. Yeshlam, there's also chochmas amukis v'sichlim delim. There's also deep wisdom and great sichlim, great ideas. He's not dismissing it. Asher kulam misamtim b'mevsim basiya upoil. All of them are misamtim, means they are verified. They are. There's a word in English, but it's not verified. Misamtim. It's on the tip of my tongue. They all are proven to be true. B'mevsim, meaning mevsim means proofs. Basiya upoil, when you see it in action and being implemented. You see from the actions and the implementation, that tells you, that indicates and that verifies. Misamis means something that's verified to be true. How do we know that it's intelligent? You see from the action. You see such a actionable order, tells you there's a lot of wisdom behind this. What he calls here, again, chachmas amuk is deep wisdoms, and sichlim delim, great intelligence. Great ideas, great innovation. I need the synonym for verify. Okay.
Verifiable. Verifiable.
Yeah, something like verifiable, yeah. But it's more than verifiable. It's not just, it's more, it's like, it proved misamtim. I'll look it up. You need a thesaurus. Okay. Shelo yuchul lahachish gam b'mi she'eina meven hachachma hi, which is undeniable. Even someone that does not understand this wisdom, you see it from the product. Like I said, you see an iPhone, yeah, right away. No, there's a lot of depth in here. It's genius, actually. Now the Rebbe has a footnote here because the word mimi seems a little out of place. Because it said gam, so the Rebbe says either it's supposed to say yuchlu lahachish gam mi, that it cannot be denied also one who doesn't understand this chachma, or the Rebbe gives a different way to read it. Oy yuchlu lihichachesh gam mi. It cannot be denied even through a person. It's a different tense, using the word chachosh in a different tense. The Rebbe says ches charuka, yeah, l'chi chochesh, gam mi. The Havana is the same. It's just the Rebbe's the mi seems that, So bottom line is that it's so clear that there's a deep wisdom here that can't be denied even by someone who doesn't know the wisdom. In other words, you don't need an expert to know that this thing required wisdom to be built. That's the bottom line. Okay, that's Chochmas HaMaisa. Fine. Now, what about Chochmas HaNefesh? Meaning an understanding, literally Chochmas HaNefesh, understanding the soul, or as I said, it's actually psychology means the study of the soul, but it's essentially understanding the inner workings of something, not something that you see from some mamoshisdik or some tangible way. Chochmas HaNefesh, I'm sorry, the Chochmas HaRuchnius, K'moi Chochmas HaNefesh v'zgulesav, now he calls it Chochmas HaRuchnius, a more sublime or ethereal wisdom, or spiritual wisdom. I'd like ethereal, like Chochmas HaNefesh, like the wisdom of the nefesh, understanding. People who have like an understanding of personality, of psychology, v'zgulesav. Zgulesav here means not zgula as we usually understand it, like a sign or something, or like we said before, the zgula's features. Here he means zgulas as in features. And its benefits, you can almost say. Would you agree, Rab Shleimer, that he means zgulesav as benefits or features or derivatives, something like that? No, it's qualities. This type of wisdom has a certain qualities to it. So he says, Asher im hayes. So even though Asher gam behem yeshna minyanim hamisamtim b'mevsim muchshim, even though there's also things that indicate and verify the truth through mevsim muchshim. In other words, for example, let's say you go see someone, a rav, a mashpia, a good spiritual soul doctor who understands humans. He understands, let's say, human nature. So you can also have an element where you see from his advice or his insight, you can also see, wow, he sees something that others don't see. So it's not purely all invisible. In other words, he says there's a similarity to the first level of Chochmah, because there are also things that will indicate and verify the truth and the wisdom of this individual. So, but nevertheless, however you look at it, they won't be as tangible as the tangible proof, so to speak, of Chochmas HaMaaseh v'Ha'Poel, the Chochma of action and Poel, and bringing things into action, into implement or execute. Why? Ki kishem shechochmas asiyah. Because just as chochmas asiyah, the wisdom in the actionable wisdom, looking for a good word, maybe utilitarian. No, it's not a good one. Chochmas asiyah. Because just as it is with chochmas asiyah, the chochma around something actionable, hagam shehi ruchnius legabe guf hapoel v'hamaisa haba ma'chochma, even though the chochma itself, the wisdom, let's say, that built a iPhone, a smartphone. Let's not discriminate against Google, against Android. Yeah. Even though compared to the actual product, the guf hapoel v'hamaisa, the actual product, whether it's a pot, whether it's sculpture, whether it's a building, whether it's weaving, embroidery, whatever it may be. What did I say earlier? Carpentry. So let's say you see a beautiful table. So the table itself, compared to the wisdom that was required by the one who built the table, so the wisdom is obviously ruchnius, more ruchnius than the gashmius product. That's what he says. Agamshi ruchnius legabe gufa poel v'amaisa habama ba'chochmahi, that came as a result of that wisdom. Okay. Aval im zeh hi mugbala u mugdara b'hagbolas v'gdarim gashmim lefi erech mailas hachachma. Nevertheless, compared to the product, yes, it's more sublime, it's more ethereal, it's more ruchni. But nevertheless, it's limited, mugbala or mugdara, and defined. Hagbolas v'gedarim. Hagbala usually is limit, gedarim is usually parameters. Like a gedder is like the boundaries, the parameters of something. Hagbala is this limit, it's finite limit. Gashmim, lefi erech mailas hachachma. That's commensurate to the whatever chachma. In other words, let's say the wisdom of carpentry, or pottery, or glass blowing, whatever. I mean, I use a bunch of examples. All of them apply. That wisdom compared to the product is more ethereal, but the wisdom itself is still has its limitations and its parameters according to the chachma of carpentry. It's not as he's going to explain as ruchni as chachmas hanefesh. That's really where he's going with this. And he's saying, because he says, so even though the chachmas hanefesh has a certain tangible side, yet it's not as tangible as the chachma of Maisa. So he says, why? Because just like Maisa also has an element that's not so tangible, but it's still relatively defined and limited to that chachma. Liyeshe chachma dasio peil. Because at the end of the day, it's a chachma around carpentry, around embroidery, around art, whatever you want to, whatever it may be. The kol chachma hi gedura begidra hakloli mashihi. And every type of wisdom, no matter what it is gedura, is defined by begidra hakloli in its general parameter, whatever mashihi, what it is. And one wisdom does not cross over to another. Doesn't mean there can't be overlap. It doesn't mean you can't have wisdom in several areas. But the general wisdom, meaning the skill of any particular craft or any particular building something, whatever form it is, we spoke different forms of engineering and so on, is defined by its gather. Okay. Now he's going to go back to compare. And therefore, therefore, in Chachmas HaNefesh, going back to Chachmas HaNefesh, the wisdom of the soul, what we can call of the psyche of, also in those matters where it's more tangible, like we said before, that's similar to the proofs or the factors that indicate in a very tangible way, in a physical way, there's a certain similarity. Even those things that can be indicated, like you see, you recognize the wisdom of a soul doctor, of someone who understands the human psyche, Chachmas HaNefesh, and you can be somewhat tangible. Even that, he says, it retains, but it remains in its soulful or spirit. It remains more in an ethereal state. I'm trying to define, but in its soulful, in its ethereal soulfulness or spirit. It remains something.
An example for Moivse Amishush Begeshem?
The Dugmas Moivse Amishush Begeshem.
Example?
He said it before already. I explained it 5 lines earlier. You talk to somebody who you see has wisdom, you give him a problem, you tell him, I have a challenge with my spouse, I have a challenge with my own fear, and you can see in a somewhat tangible way that he's got this intelligence. He says, so it has something similar. He said in the beginning, he says, Chachmas HaNefesh has some things that can be more tangible. Even that, he says, still is just the outer surface. It really still retains, and it's fundamentally much more ethereal and much more sublime than the wisdom of Maisa. That's what he's saying. Liyes, being shezeu gidrei shu geder ruchni. Why? Because this geder, When you're talking about the skill, the art of carpentry or the art of architecture or other so-called things, how to build something, how to craft something, chokhmas hamaisa or b'poel, there, yes, there's wisdom in it, but the wisdom is around something much more tangible. Whereas here, chokhmas hanefesh, you're really talking about a different type of wisdom. It's a different quality of understanding. It's understanding things that are not tangible, understanding what makes us tick, understanding the deeper part of a human nature. This, even the part that's tangible, still remains in the gather of Ruchni. Bottom line is that in the chokhmas ha'asiyah, you have the geshem. You could almost say the mitzias of the mitzias and the muhus of the mitzias is the chokhmah of Maisa. In chokhmas hanefesh, it's muhus of muhus, and mitzias of muhus is the part that you can tangibly relate to. He doesn't say these words, but since we learned it so much, it sounds very, very similar. In other words, one is gathered as chokhmas hanefesh by definition is much more of an ethereal type of wisdom, much more sublime, much more intangible, abstract. And chokhmas ha'maisa is much more tangible. Both of them have chokhmah. Both of them have something that's tangible. But fundamentally, each one has its gather. In other words, if you were, let's say, they were giving courses, it would probably be in a different category. Courses like learning how to embroidery, or weaving, or art, or engineering, or mechanics, or the other examples I gave is one category. The other category would be something more like in the social sciences. That would be like the physical sciences. The social sciences would be more things like psychology, social, etc., which is far more about understanding things that are, which actually some people don't even call science, because you don't have the same type of tangible element to it, where you can say, how do you know who's a good psychologist, who's a good therapist? We all know there's a lot of ones that are very bad. When it comes to carpentry, you know very quickly if it's a good carpenter or not, because the proof of it is going to be in a tangible way. So one is far more ethereal and one is far more tangible. Despite the fact, nevertheless, they all have wisdom. No one's denying that there's. He said chachma. He said chachma amuka. Chochmas amukis and sichlim gdelim, even in the more physical science, so to speak. Maybe it's the difference between like a physical science, let's say like biology or chemistry, as opposed to quantum mechanics or theoretical physics. Maybe not exactly, because I think physics may not go into the category of chochmas hanefesh, but just thinking about different type of more theoretical sciences versus more practical sciences.
I think that would be exactly what the Rebbe is talking about, because it says in that line, "V'chachas ruchnius kamo chachmas hanefesh zugulasab." Meaning there are other. It's plural. It's not just talking about chachmas hanefesh. It's talking about spirit, theoretical. I would think theoretical physics, pure mathematics. Anything that's on a theoretical basis, even maybe biology, except they're not applied biology, biological or chemistry, might be something like that, rather than applied, as you say, mechanics, engineering, things that are dealing with the physical world in a more applied sense.
Yeah. Okay. But here he does say his main focus is chochmas hanefesh here, but you probably can find these two levels in different. It's fine. Look, the bottom line he wants to communicate here is he's going to want to explain the difference in tzva haaretz and tzva hashamayim. The difference, the sipur, how each narrative is told. So meanwhile, okay.
Even the more ruchniistic one here that we're talking about, chachas and nefesh, is still tzva haaretz, correct? It's not. We're not yet talking about.
No. It's going to be an example for tzva hashamayim, I believe.
It is.
Let's see. He's going to conclude. We'll see. Yeah, I think so. Let's not guess. He's going to say it. Okay. Well, I'm just repeating. Even things that are more tangible that you can see and recognize in a tangible way. You Yes, they remain in their more the world of spirit, the more spiritual, the more ethereal ruchnis. Because it's gathered, because it's gathered, its parameters, its realm, its domain is a soulful or is ethereal domain. Look, I'll not digress, but let me just say this for a moment. Very often, my own journeys, speak to people. Some people are wired who are very spiritual. They just have a sense that there's something beyond, something that's not tangible. There are people who literally, I believe everybody has spirituality in them. That's not a question in my mind. You see it through love and through other things. But there are people who've told me, I don't get spirituality. I just don't get it. One guy once told me, he's a businessman, he says, the only thing I get is something I can count. I can't count spirituality. What are the 10 spheres? Atzilus. These are some people see it as complete nonsense even. Chaz v'shalom. Even guys that went to yeshiva, by the way, because it was taught to them in a very, like I've mentioned many times, it taught them there's Lamites Malachas and 10 spheres and 9 planets. So you can imagine, you stick it in that category, and it's like apples and oranges and almonds and pepper and salt and sridus, like a grocery list. Okay, fine, because it's not taught properly. But there's some people that just sense that this is not reality. There's something more. And some people don't sense it naturally, whatever the reason is. I'm not sure. My theory's on the matter. Maybe it's what you grow up with. If you're around people who are very materialistic, maybe. I don't know. I know some people say, well, if you experimented with the proper substances, you wouldn't have this issue. I think Steve Jobs told Bill Gates that had you dropped some acid, Microsoft would have there never would have been an Apple. That's what he said. Okay, but that's time a joke, and it's off the record. Getting back to our topic here, I know he's not talking about that here, but spirituality is a type of wisdom that someone can say to you, what are you talking about? It's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Show it to me. I understand things. Carpentry, I understand. Art, I understand. What is this commodity called spirituality? So those that sense spirituality know, I don't need proof. It's like you have an innate awareness that you have a soul. Psychology, actually, some people, I don't know if you know, there are people, hardcore scientists, who consider psychology quack stuff because you can't prove anything. How do you know? This one has a theory. There's no way to prove it in real life. On the other hand, we all know that you can call it whatever you want to call it. Chachmas HaNefesh, there's something about it. People deal with fears, insecurities, inhibitions, jealousy, ego. I mean, it wouldn't be $1 trillion industry if it was, so there is something that makes us tick. But clearly it's a different category of intelligence that you can't use actually the same rules as you would use we talked before about science. You can't use the rules of a laboratory to talk about the soul or the spirit. Maybe there's some overlap in how you, whatever, but it's not in the same league. It was Sir Arthur Eddington. He was a physicist, I think, in the 30s or the 40s. So when they were coming out with all these quantum bizarre conclusions that was completely counterintuitive, a world of unpredictability and indeterminism, which goes against everything science always stood for. Science was always absolute predictability. You strike the billiard ball effect. You strike a billiard ball a certain way, a certain angle with a certain strength and velocity, the result will always be the same. If it's a different result, it means you struck it differently. This is the rules that we depend on, that the sun rises a certain time and it's not indeterministic. And the laws of Newtonian physics, etc. So they're all the bizarre conclusions that the observer affects it and different results is a light wave, a particle. It's not relevant here, the details. So he gave an excellent analogy. I always use it. to explain, because people said you never even saw an atom, let alone a subatomic particle. It's not visible to the eye. There's no telescope. I'm sorry, there's no microscope that can see an atom. The cluster of grapes that we've shown in textbooks in school are just a workable model. It's not because it looks like that. No one's ever seen atoms. So he was asked the question, as many physicists, how do you come to conclusions about things you don't even see? If you could show empirical proof, okay. We know, for example, you take water, you freeze it, it becomes ice. You warm it, you heat it, it becomes gas. That's undeniable. Where are your proofs? So he said, he gave an analogy of a fisherman that spread his net across all the seas and started gathering all the fish he could gather and began documenting the fish. Just a mashal, an example. And of course, he documented different species and different colors and different sizes and different shapes, whatever. Documented all the fish. Then he came to a brilliant, quote unquote, conclusion that there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. And he was about to make a big announcement. His little daughter looked at his conclusion. She said, "What do you mean, Daddy? I've seen fish that are shorter than a half-inch long, goldfish and tiny fish." And then, of course, she looked at the net with him. The net that he used to capture the fish were half-inch spaces between the ropes. So, of course, all the fish that were shorter than a half-inch long fell back into the water. So Eddington used this example. He said, it depends on what instruments you use. If you say to me, I want to see love, I'm saying now, with my eyes, no, the eyes cannot see love. You can see an expression of love, but you can't see love. You want to see fire and water? Yes, you can use your eyes. But there are things that you cannot see or hear or taste, touch, and smell with the regular senses because they have a different reality. You need a different net. A regular microscope and human eyes are not able to see, so you need to test it. How do they test it? They test it at ultra tremendous speeds. They speed up the electrons in the atoms, or tremendous heat. They create fusion, fission, and you see the result. You don't see the actual thing, you see the result. My point is, it's, I think, a good example. You see the result, b'muchesh. But at the end of the day, it's still a chokhmah that's not a muchesh chokhmah. It's not something you'll ever be able to go into a subatomic particle and observe it, what exactly is happening. You see the result of it. It's just an example. I'm not saying it's a perfect example, but it's a chokhmah that fundamentally is a different geder. It's a far more sublime way of looking at existence. And then there are things that you absolutely could measure. You can measure and you can touch and you can, like I said, different experiments that are very tangible and very real. It's also a chokhmah. The chokhmah of let's say, what I mentioned, taking, let's say, creating synthetic substances from different alloys. That's a real chokhmah. That's real wisdom there. It's brilliant. But at the end of the day, it's a very tangible, like he says, meivsim muchesh, but muchesh, meivsim, what's the lashon you use? Meivsim, muchshim kemuchim meivsim chamos amaisa pe'el. Meivsim hamishus begeshem. That you could actually relate to and measure in that way. Anyway, I just threw it in because I wanted to broaden it out, but I think it's pretty clear. Chochmas HaNefesh versus Chochmas HaMaaseh u'Poel. Okay. Liyash Uzel Geder Shu Geder Ruchni. Continuing on. The Im Yeh Loikein. One second. What does this mean? The Im Yeh Loikein Ozhari Hu Einei Mashahu Be'emes. I think he means, and tell me if somebody understands differently, if something that's a seichel geder ruchni, even though it has some elements, like he said, that you can tangibly indicate. Like I said, you could see a person as brilliant psychologist from certain things, but fundamentally it's still a geder ruchni, it's still a seichel chochmas hanefesh. The imli eloikein, and if it would not be that way, ozharihu einam mashu be'emes, and if it wouldn't remain fundamentally sublime, it wouldn't be the choch, that wouldn't be that category. What it truly is, it really belongs in the sublime, in the spiritual domain, or the ethereal domain is a better word here. In other words, if you try to take the ethereal and turn it into a tangible science, it wouldn't be what it really is. I think that's what he's trying to say. Does anybody feel otherwise? Because it's not clear to me 100% what this line is saying. I think that's what he was trying to say. Maybe it'll be understood from the coming lines. So let's leave it at that. But let's read on, and maybe they'll understand this line. This line's a little abstract. I mean, I want to just read. So even the things Geshem, okay. Yeah, I think that's what it means. Like going back to Eddington's example, if you're going to try to take a subatomic particle and turn it into, let's say, a baseball, it's not going to work. It's not its field. It's not its domain. It always will remain ethereal. Only thing is, you may find some tangible proofs that result from it. Like we said, we know today that the quantum mechanics has resulted in things. It's not just a theoretical idea. There are proofs for it, but the proofs are not fundamentally physical ones. There's the results of these interactions. Like, today, computers actually and the microchip, a lot of them are built on, they're building now quantum computing. So there is ways that you can demonstrate. I think that was the word maybe I was saying, demonstrate maybe. What did I remember? I was looking for a word, verify. What was the word? Misamtim, demonstrate. The mevsim. Demonstrate is also a good word. Okay, good. Let's continue, and then we'll see maybe the meaning of this line is a little different. I think that's the meaning. Now he's going to the koiches hanefesh, like the faculties of the spirit, human faculties. What does he mean by ruchnim? Remember, you see, I'm being very careful when I distinguish between spiritual and ethereal, because usually ruchni is connected somewhat to like elokus. You say Atzilus is ruchni, spiritual. But here, ruchni doesn't necessarily mean godliness. Ruchni here means not gashmi. It's physical and ethereal, tangible and more abstract. So that's why not using here ruchni so much like we take a gashmi and make it a ruchni. We take a physical entity and through a mitzvah, you bring spiritual energy into it, or divine energy. That's why I'm just distinguishing. So koiches hanefesh, ruchni means the physical eye is a gashmi. The koyach ha'ariyah, the power to see, is a ruchni. So he said the koiches hanefesh, even though the koiches ruchni means ethereal faculties, mekom mokim misamtim b'mevsim muchshim. Yeah, nevertheless, they are verified, and their veracity is another word, is a good word. The veracity is demonstrated through mevsim muchshim. You don't have to, it's not built on faith. You can actually tangibly see the results of knowing that the faculties are functioning.
Empirically verifiable.
Okay, perhaps. Yeah, muchshim is the empirical. Yeah. And the mevsim, these empirical proofs, these proofs. They are not only about the existence of these faculties. You could say, you know what? If a person is able to see, we know there has to be a power to see, because, God forbid, a corpse also has eyes and can't see. So you have to say the function of seeing tells you there must be a power to see. If I can use my hand to write, it means there's a koyach, a tnua, or a koyach. If you see intelligence coming out of someone's mouth, they're saying something or writing something, there's seichel. You can't see the seichel, but you see its results in a very empirical, tangible way. So he's saying now, not only does it indicate that it exists, that you have a koyach ruchni, it also indicates and tells you about its quality. Going back to the example with sight. If someone sees 20/20 vision, or someone doesn't see, so not just knowing that you have a koyach hariyah, you also know that the koyach hariyah is either weaker or stronger. It could be due to the keli, that's true. But it could also be due to the koyach. So in other words, for example, he mentioned before a gibber, somebody that can lift a stone of 500 pounds, a weight of 500 pounds. Someone can lift 300 pounds, so that when they lift it, it tells you about their strength, but not just that they have strength, it could also tell you the quality of their strength, etc. So he's saying, yeah, and nevertheless, after all this, the same
The
expression
loirak
is used.
is extra. What do you need the loirak? והכלים והמויפסים אינם בעניין מציאוסם בלבד, כי הם גם בעניין ייחוסם. או אינם רק.
It works. He wants to say not only. He could have said einam rak. He could have said ba'mevsim loirak. Basically, you're supposed to read it like this.
Okay.
Let me just, I'll rephrase it and you'll see how it works. Then you wouldn't have a problem, right?
Right.
Okay, so I don't know why he reversed the order, but that's the teichen. It's like saying, I don't know, it's a matter of language.
No, you can't say that. לא רק שאינם בעניין מציאוסם, והמייפסים בעניין okay.
The existence of the faculties, but also their quality.
Yeah, והמייפסים אינם בעניין מציאוסם בלבד, כי הם גם בעניין ייחוסם.
So the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted to add loirak to make sure that it means not only. What can I tell you?
Okay.
I don't think, I mean, it's a matter of language. The Rebbe writes in the letter that we shouldn't be medayik so much in the digduk of the Rabbeim. Like even he and who, Lashon Nekeva, Lashon Zachar. Okay, you ever see the letter?
I think so.
Yeah.
But the Alter Rebbe was makpid. I think in this letter is also right.
Yeah, it's a chelik zayin, the Hisofis. I think it's the Shmini or something, or Sazriya.
I think the language is perfect. The Rebbe wants to emphasize not only you think it's the difference is that you being a mitziyusam. I'll go a step forward. The word lo Irak gives it more of a dogish, makes it more clear.
I agree.
There's no mistaking those words.
Sounds a little. Look, you see that Rebbe corrects anywhere he thinks something is. So this he doesn't touch. Okay, v'acher kol zeh. This is all an example. V'acher kol zeh. And after all this, as much as there's tangible indication and verification and demonstration of the ruchnis through intangible ways, after all this, hakeches asmim nisharim beruchni yusam. The faculties themselves remain ethereal. They don't become more tangible just because you have tangible indicators that verify their existence and their quality. Basically, he's explaining, therefore, so even chochmas hanefesh or chochma ruchnis, that's more ethereal, even though there may be, and it has also tangible elements, it still remains in its spiritual. So that line, the way I translate it, is correct. Right, exactly. Because it remains, a koyach remains a ruchni. Just because it has a tangible expression does not mean it's not a ruchni. And therefore, it's not in the same category as, let's say, chachmas hamaisa v'apoil, like you spoke earlier, the other category of chachma. The tama dover, and the reason for this is, lies, because kikol mitzias being, kikol mitzias ruchni, Because every ethereal entity, hagam sheyesh lemitzias bedugmas mitzias hageshem, even though it has an existence, a domain, it's a domain, it has a realm. Just like Geshem has an existence, the spiritual, the ethereal also has mitzias. Bekol mokem hisam tusei b'meifus, its veracity, its actual veracity through some proof. Eine kefi inyan kamuse ki'im kefi inyan echuse. It's not according to its kamus, its quantity, as it is with more physical items, but it's according to its quality. Wow, Friedrich Rebbe is really dissecting this. This is a classic Friedrich Rebbe style, for the record, how he analyzes Ruchnis and Gashmis. Okay, so that's the reason. That's the reason. So Keiches HaNefesh, even though you can say, okay, by seeing, let's say, the power of, it's by seeing it's a tangible result of the faculty. So you could, which can be measured and proved. Nevertheless, the faculty retains its so-called ethereal nature and is fundamentally defined not by kamus, by quantity, but more by quality. So though it exists like Ruchnis, the Gashmis exists, Gashmis is defined by volume, by size, by, you measure it that way. The measure of Ruchnis is measured by quality. That's essentially what he's saying. Yeah. So therefore, even though physical items, going back to Chochmas HaMaisa, can be measured, are measured in a tangible way, and there is a certain ethereal element to the Chochmah, but still that Chochmah relates much more to the Geder, to the parameters of the empirical. Same thing the other way around. Even though you could measure to some extent and verify, establish, demonstrate the nature of something ethereal, it remains an ethereal element that is really more measured by quality than by quantity. Okay, good. The same thing will be understood. Till now, I talk about Ruchni in general. Now, in Ruchni Gufa, the Metzias Ruchni is like Seichel, intelligence, intellect. Sheyesh hefresh bein Seichel b'chochmas ha'maisa l'Seichel b'chochmas ha'nefesh. He's going back. There's a difference between the intelligence and the skill in Chochmas HaMaisa, the wisdom of something that's actionable, some type of action-oriented thing, to the Seichel on page 141, the Chochmas HaNefesh, the wisdom of the Nefesh, of the spirit. So all this is coming to explain that there's a difference. Even though both of them are verifiable through actual proofs, and both of them, those proofs are empirical, meaning they are tangible. Mukhshim, you can measure, you can feel them, you can sense them. Aval imzeh, yet, nevertheless, or simultaneously, imzeh, together with this fact, there's another. Hem chalukim be'efan hamuchash. They are distinguishable. They're different in the way they are sensed, the way they are related to. The b'chochmas ha'maisa, in chochmas ha'maisa, something that's a wisdom connected to something of action, like we spoke the different examples. I used carpentry, I used electrician, whatever it may be. The meif is the proof or the indicator. Will be mukhshi, will be very tangible, will be tangible, in the existence of the thing that you're understanding. Not sure what he means by mitzvuse. Let's see what he says by Chochmas HaNefesh, and I'll go back to it. Okay. Like we said before, when you see, let's say, a beautiful table built, a house, art, it tells you that there's a mitzias of something that put it there. There's a chachma. You know, someone very smart, someone very skilled, a craftsperson built that. So you know the mitzias, like he said it before, very clear. You know the mitzias of the chachmas hamaisa, but you don't know the emek of it. The Yunus, he said he called the Yediyah Yunus. 1 second, just a second. I want to just find the exact word. You do like I'm sure you do. Yeah. So even someone, like he said, that is not himself a skilled craftsperson in this area, sees a wisdom, but it's the mitzias of the davar hamusig, mitzias shel hamusig, the existence of it, and chachmas hanefesh, the mephis is b'muchusei shel hamusig. You understand it's the muchus, the inner personality of the thing that's being understood. So when you understand, let's say, what makes a person tick, you're not just saying, like, for example, someone says, okay, see, someone got angry. So the anger indicates and tells you they must have some cause for the anger. But you don't know the muhus, you just know the mitzias of that. That's not actually a good example here, but I just was thinking of it. Muhus chachmas hanefesh means you understand something on a muhus level, an inner personality level. Mahu, not just that it exists, but mahu. So that's the difference between the chachma of Maisa and the chachma of nefesh. Now he's going to say this, but before we read it inside, it basically would be that when you see God's creation, what do you discover from that? You can discover that God is smart. Kulam b'chachma sisa. There's a wisdom, just like the wisdom of a craftsman that built a very powerful machine or a powerful mechanism, whatever it may be. But you don't know you don't know the depth of what lies behind it. What makes him tick, so to speak. Like we learned a lot about God, if you remember when we learned about the idea to know that you can know that God created the world, but you don't know anything about God. We talked about spheres from the word actually sipur. So there was spheres from the word mispar, a number. The number tells you that God created this number, many things. So you know that he can create a lot, volume, like we said before. Then you have sipur, a story. You know more of the inner story. Then you have sapir, which was transparency. I'm just bringing it up in case anybody you're thinking about that. But going back to this, so now there's the difference between what makes something tick, like the inner workings, or knowing that there's a wisdom that made it happen. He's going to bring this back now to the two ways that Tzva Haaretz and Tzva Shamayim Misapa, there's two different narratives. Saying that Tzva Haaretz is a narrative that tells us about the wisdom of the so-called architecture of the universe. And Tzva Shamayim tell us about the quality of God's deeper inner strength. That's what he's going to say.
In Tzva Haaretz, you don't see it. It's not a bigger Tzva Shamayim, but you have enough thing to see it in Tzva Haaretz.
Why don't we finish learning and then we'll discuss it? I think it's been covered already and it's going to cover more. I don't want to stop in the middle with a question before he finishes the subject. So he says like this. And this is the meaning that from Tzva Shamayim, the celestial bodies, it's 11, wow. That from them we know, Magadlu, how great are your actions, God. This awareness, this perception is because Ma'oid Amku, how very deep are your thoughts, God's thoughts. I'm sorry, let me read the niggin a little differently. That's the idea is because very deep are your thoughts. This awareness, this perception, he yediyah iyunis l'gabei yediyah muchshis or muchashas, the mola aretz kinyanecha. This is a yediyah iyunis, a deeper perception than the yediyah, the tangible awareness or perception that the world is filled with your kinyan, it's your possessions. Kidugmas, bidugmas dovar, k'moy chachmas hanefesh l'gabe chachmas hamaisa. Like, for example, chachmas hanefesh, knowing the nefesh, the so-called what makes someone tick, their inner workings, in comparison to knowing that the wisdom in the thing that they built, whatever it may be. So let's say an artist, the art can tell you there's a great artist, and chachmas hanefesh will tell you what type of greatness he has. And that would be the difference between Tzva Ha'aretz and Tzva Shamayim. Now, he didn't yet finish the subject matter, but we have to stop somewhere. So I think I'm going to stop here. But I will say the following. What he did say earlier about this topic is that Tzva Ha'aretz, even though there are enormous creatures and creations, I mentioned glaciers, even the sea itself, the ocean itself is vast. These very tall trees, etc. But nevertheless, the main focus, the primary element that you see, the feature on Earth is its volume. The literally unlimited amount of species, and within each species. So volume tells you, like he said, chokhmah. Kulam b'chokhmah sisa. It tells you that hakol elokus. Everything is godly. Everything is governed, b'hashgacha pratis, by God. That's what he said till now. What he's calling that is chokhmas hamaisa. That's the wisdom of the action of creation. The creation is like the carpentry we spoke about before. Obviously much more, but it's the chokhmah within the chokhmah of existence. You could almost say it's chokhmas ha'elam. It's God's wisdom that you discover through science. In heaven, Shamayim Misaprim is the heavens are about Godlu. They are about size, not about volume. Their awesome size, their enormous size teaches you about God's, in a way, much more awesomeness. That God is awesome, not just that God is there in everything, but something about showing something that's completely mind-blowing in that sense. What he considers, he calls it more echus. He's definitely calling it more quality and much more about understanding that God's so-called bligvul, maybe. I think he's going to say some things like this a little later. This is so far what I would sum up what he's saying. I'm not saying it's completely finished. That's why we're still in the middle of the subject. So I would just either peek ahead, if you like, or we'll learn it together. But I'd stop here. We'll get there. So if you don't have it clear yet, we will get there. So we'll stop here, like we get close to the top of page 141, and we'll resume